Who would have thought that my 23-year marriage to Jane would be in jeopardy after the birth of my first grandson? I'm currently parked a short distance away from my daughter's house in the back seat of a hired company van. I sincerely hope that the events that follow won't lead to the dissolution of what I felt to be a lovely and loving marriage. On the days she sees her grandson, Jane usually goes for a lengthy run around noon, according to my daughter Sarah. According to Sarah, Jane normally comes back an hour later looking really radiant from her workout. I'm here to see what kind of exercise Jane does. I'm Bill Jones, and I was living the dream only a month ago. My company is doing really well. I am a 47-year-old co-owner of a manufacturing facility that is about to get a new patent that will completely change how plastic is extruded. Even after splitting the patent's earnings with my co-inventor and the 5 investors who helped fund our development, if all goes as planned, I should receive several $1 million from the patent. Besides my work, I thought my personal life was everything I could wish for. As I mentioned, my wife seemed to love me and our life together. We have one child, Sarah, whom we both proudly call our daughter. Sarah met, married, and got pregnant by a wonderful man, 10 years her senior right after college. The most amusing thing about Sarah is how effortlessly she transitioned into a full-time mother and homemaker. Here's a woman, really, but she'll always be my girl who graduated with honors and was determined to take the financial world by storm. Her graduation gift from her mom and me was a 6-week tour of Europe, a reward for finishing college in 3 years, saving us a lot of money. While most of her peers spent their spring and summer breaks at the beach, Sarah met her future husband in Europe. She claims it was love at first sight, something she hadn't considered possible before that first evening in Madrid. She also insists it was fate, as Jim Taylor hailed from Jane's hometown of Olympia. When Sarah returned from her European tour, she moved into her grandparents' house, Jane's parents' home, and 6 months later, she was engaged to Jim. 18 months later, she married him and became pregnant with our first grandchild. Jane couldn't have been more thrilled and immediately cut back her hours at work to spend time with Sarah and the baby. You now know that I have a wonderful career and that I'm a very content father, grandfather, and father-in-law. And now we come to my marriage to Jane. I went to Washington University and met Jane. Jane had transferred from Washington State, and I was a senior. One of the class essays we took together was necessary to earn a college degree. Jane is still a very lovely woman. She has always been. She has an athletic frame, stands 172 centimeters tall, and has been running since high school. Her dark eyes are gorgeous, and she smiles so beautifully. The first day I saw her, I fell in love. But following our brief talks in class, I saw that she seemed guarded. I worked up the nerve to ask her out by the end of the quarter, and she graciously accepted. After one date, everything appeared to be setting up for a long-term relationship. After our third or fourth date, I found out why she was hesitant. She had just gone through a really difficult breakup. In high school, Jane caught up with her 3-year boyfriend and 1 year in college, in bed with another girl. Jane endured his infidelity for almost 4 months before finally giving him an ultimatum. He had to choose. By that time, he was quite cocky and blatantly chose both, suggesting a threesome. Jane had had enough, dropped out of school, and transferred to the university. I believe this led to our second chance at romance. The topic seemed to touch Jane deeply, and she never brought it up again. I'm very confident Jane was a lovely, devoted wife for the following 22 years, and that we had a decent marriage. Even though we occasionally had small arguments, we always made up before going to bed, and if nothing else, gave each other a goodnight kiss. I never took a detour from the route. I did, of course, occasionally admire other ladies, but I never felt the need to go beyond and spoil something wonderful. Every now and then, Jane would catch me staring at a woman on the dance floor or at the beach. Gently, she would give me a shoulder pat and say, "Remember, you can look, but not for too long, and never touch," with a beaming grin and a twinkle in her eyes. So what happened when Sarah's son William was born? Yes, named after me. Jane decided she needed to spend time with Sarah and little Bill, as we call him. Once a week, Jane would get into her car and drive 120 kilometers from our home in North Seattle to Olympia. Mileage-wise, it's not far, but anyone who's driven that stretch knows that the journey from point A to point B takes hours. After a couple of months of back and forth trips on the same day, and as winter approached, Sarah bought a sleeper sofa and placed it in their office so Jane could stay overnight. Jane could head south in the morning on the first day and be back home before rush hour on the second. I used the evenings when Jane wasn't home to work on the patent. This new routine worked so well that Jane continued to stay overnight in Olympia even after the weather improved the following spring. On Saturday, July 9th, little Bill had his first birthday. Sarah and Jim planned to throw a party in the bar in their large backyard to celebrate the occasion. During the picnic, two minor incidents occurred, both of which played a part in piecing together the fragments of this mystery. I sat in a comfortable lounge chair, sipping cold beer when Jim and Sarah joined me. They noticed me staring at Jane. Jim spoke first. "You're a lucky man, Dad. I must admit I followed my father's advice and looked at Sarah's mother to see what my future wife would look like at 42 before proposing." Sarah patted him on the shoulder, just as her mom always did to me. "You're a pig. I can't believe you'd say that. What if my mom wasn't such a babe? Would you have dumped me?" I tried to save Jim. "It's true, Sarah. I did the same. Just one look at your grandma convinced me your mom was an angel." With those words, Sarah hit me on the shoulder. "All right, Dad. But what are us girls supposed to do? Look at our dads." If so, I would rather just stare at the gleaming bald spot. Laughing, the three of us looked over at Jim's father, who was working in the bar. Jim's father is a lovely man, but he struggles with male pattern baldness and tries to grow out and style his hair. The wind was blowing it right now, and he looked like the President of the United States. "Anyway, Jim, you're correct. I consider myself fortunate. What percentage of men are wed to a 45-year-old lady who has a 37-year-old's body?" "She must be in great shape considering how much she runs every day that she's here," Sarah retorted. "Mom leaves the house at midday and runs to and from the waterfront for at least an hour. I have no idea how she manages it. Yes, she does run at least 5 days a week from her house. I go outside with her once or twice a week, and she gives me a firm shove. She runs 8 kilometers in 10 minutes. I believe she will attempt a half marathon this autumn. She deserves credit, so you must." Around this time, Jeff, Jim's father, gathered everyone and started serving corn on the cob, grilled in its husk, and burgers, including some amazingly tasty veggie burgers, the first ones I've ever had. I sat with Jeff and Jim, and we compared work notes. Jeff had a restaurant supply business, and he was grooming Jim to take it over when it was time for him to retire in 8 years or so. After eating, I went inside to get a couple of beers for the three of us, and just as I was about to step out through the door into the backyard, something caught my attention inside the house. Behind Jim and Sarah, I took a step back into the house and focused my gaze. Sure enough, Jim and Sarah's neighbor from the backyard was standing by the window on the upper floor, peering into our yard through binoculars. I couldn't say for certain, but it seemed like he was watching the table where Jane, Sarah, and Jim's mom were sitting. Creepy. When I returned through that door to the backyard, the neighbor quickly lowered his binoculars and stepped away from the window. "Jim, what's up with your neighbor behind you?" I just saw him looking this way through binoculars. Both Jim and Jeff grabbed their beers and looked at me as if to ask, "What the hell?" "That's Alan Ross. He's actually a sales rep for one of our main suppliers, and this guy gives me the creeps. Last year, we had a neighborhood watch party, and even though he doesn't live in our neighborhood, he showed up. It struck everyone as a bit odd. I've caught him staring at Sarah more than once, so I approached him and talked to him. He obviously recognized me, was surprised we were neighbors, and apologized. He said Sarah reminded him of someone he knew from high school. I let it go, but it was weird. "Well, I hope you keep the curtains in your back bedroom closed." What an idiot. But something about this rang a bell in my head. The day had been long, and by the time Jane and I headed home, I had forgotten about the neighbor. I only remembered on Sunday morning. Jane was out for one of her runs, and I was on my second cup of coffee. So I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out one of Jane's high school yearbooks. We store photo albums in the study together with all these sentimental items. The handwritten message read, "Jane, these have been 2 wonderful years with you, and as your favorite song goes, we're just getting started." I was shocked to find this letter in the margins when I looked for the name Alan Ross. "I'm excited for the upcoming year at WSU as well as all the years to come. Your everlasting affection, A." Thus, the person who lived directly behind Sarah and Jim was Jane's ex-boyfriend. Did she know? If she did, why didn't she say anything? These and dozens of other questions were swirling in my head until Jane came home and took a shower. By the time she came downstairs, I had a fruit and yogurt smoothie ready as usual. Jane looked so fresh, blushing, and radiant. She looked so beautiful that I almost chickened out, but I held my breath and asked the question, "Jane, do you know someone named Alan Ross?" Jane's response was so smooth. Looking back, it seems like she almost anticipated this question and was ready for the answer. I knew Alan Ross in high school. We even went on a brief date. Why are you asking? I was surprised by Jane's response, so I chose to play the remaining cards openly. He resides behind Jim and Sarah. Jim called Ross out for staring at Sarah, to which Ross said that she reminded him of a girl he knew in high school. I assumed you could be the person he was referring to because of how much Sarah looked like you when she was that age. Though that's conceivable, why bring it up? Has anything occurred? No, really. But yesterday I swear I spotted him observing us from his house. That's all. It just seemed a little off. Then events cascaded to this moment when I sat in this rented van. Firstly, the next time I went into the study, Jane's high school yearbook for the graduating class wasn't on the shelf anymore. It was like a punch to the gut. I had to sit in my leather chair and catch my breath. What the hell is going on? That's when Sarah's comment from yesterday's lunch popped into my head. Mom goes out for a run every day for an hour. The implications were too dreadful to contemplate. My Jane with another man? Should I confront Jane? Should I talk to Sarah? Or maybe hire a private detective? I remember reading somewhere that you should ask yourself if you'd be better off without her. I didn't think I could bear Jane cheating on me, but would I divorce her? I couldn't answer that question that evening, especially with the scarce information I had. I went upstairs, took a sleeping pill, and went to bed. I don't even remember if I kissed Jane goodnight, but I must have because she didn't mention it at breakfast on Monday. The next 2 days at work were too hectic to think about my personal problems. Our investors were in town on Monday and Tuesday to finalize our patent progress schedule. It would have been impossible to answer their questions and at the same time try to devise a plan related to my marriage. I knew I'd have time to consider my options once the investors departed on Tuesday afternoon. I decided to accept that and get to work. I called Jane on her cell phone later on Tuesday night after dropping the investors off at the airport. She was at Sarah's on Tuesday and Wednesday. After Jane didn't respond, I gave Sarah a call. "Sarah, I've been attempting to get through to your mother, but she doesn't answer. Is she present?" "No, Papa. Mom spent tonight at Cindy Sullivan's. She seems like a former classmate to me." "Interesting. She had never brought her up before. Is this a typical occurrence?" "Not really. It varies. She runs into someone she knew while she lived here, maybe once every few weeks. She usually returns home by 11 unless she overindulges in alcohol and spends the night. Mom said getting together with the folks she grew up with is always pleasant. She still thinks that the girls in our little town are more like her than the women in Seattle. Having spent the last 4 years in Olympia, I can relate to her viewpoint. Yeah, it's a shame your mom never really liked the Nordstrom scene. She always felt more comfortable in jeans and boots. Maybe when I retire, we can make that happen. Do it sooner, Dad. Jim and I are planning on having more kids, and it would be great if all 4 grandparents lived nearby. Sarah, you never cease to amaze me. I never imagined my little go-getter would be talking about having a bunch of kids. I just found the man of my dreams and discovered that I enjoy being a mom. You and Mom can take a big part of the blame for that. All right, Sarah, I'm hitting the road now. It's a good night, and I think I'll take a long ride on the Harley. Let your mom know I won't be answering calls because I'll be on the motorcycle. Good night, Dad. Yes, it was a nice night for a ride, and I knew where I was going. It was getting dark when I got to Alan Ross's residence. Jane's Volvo was nowhere to be seen, and there was just enough light to see the red Mustang Boss parked in front of the 2-car garage. I started to speed up, but something stopped me. It was one of those pricey state-issue license plates that had the number Ross Boss and the WSU Cougar logo. What makes a person park his high-end sports vehicle in the driveway rather than the garage? I rode down the street for about a block and a half to the school, where there was a roundabout for school buses. I parked the motorcycle and pretended to work on it, keeping an eye on Ross's house. Unfortunately, Olympia is still small enough for a guy on a motorcycle to attract attention. About half an hour later, a police car pulled up nearby. Need anything? Not really, but thanks for asking, officer. I thought I might have a short circuit in the electrical system, but it turns out the last mechanic didn't tighten the negative wire on the battery. I'm just finishing up and will be leaving in about 15 minutes. I tried to look the officer in the eyes as we chatted. What will you do if that doesn't fix it? My daughter and her husband live on 3rd. I'll just ride over there, but I think I've got it sorted out. Thanks again. As I put on my helmet, the policeman drove off, but not before turning down a few more streets. He left me alone because the motorcycle was running and the headlights were on. Ross's Mustang sat still and it was getting quite dark. If I made a mistake and was discovered, the next step was challenging and embarrassing. I drove at a respectable pace in the direction of Ross's house, slow enough to kill the engine and reach the front. After parking the motorcycle, I hurried up the driveway and crept up to look through the windows of the garage. My wife's Volvo was on the left, and there was a Mercedes S-Class convertible on the right. I don't know how I did it, but maybe the past 5 days made me believe I would find exactly what I found, so it wasn't such a big surprise. I had enough nerve to go back to the Harley, start it up, and take off like a bat out of hell. I rode for 22 minutes, pulled into a tavern near the military base, and pulled out my cell phone. This time, Jane answered. Bill, Sarah said you were out riding today. Are you home? Almost. How about you? What's on your mind? I'm at Cindy Sullivan's. She's an old friend from elementary and high school. I think I'll end up spending the night here. I had a couple of glasses of wine and feel like I went overboard. I feel okay, but I don't want to take any risks. It's a wise suggestion. Hear me out. There were a few problems at the investor meeting, which is why I had to speak with you tonight. I'm leaving tomorrow via plane and I won't return until everything is resolved. I apologize for giving you this at such short notice. Oh, Bill, if you're not in town, I'll miss you. Can I remain in Olympia till you come back? I detest being alone at home, as you are aware. Please remain with Sarah. Before I leave on my return trip, I'll inform you. Saturday is the latest that it should be. Be careful. Bill, goodbye. I cherish you. Damn, why did she have to go and say that? It just made her betrayal worse. Of course, I wasn't actually planning on leaving town. I just didn't want to deal with Jane while I sorted out the rest of my life. I drove home, trying to see through blurred eyes. I don't think I'm weak, but I'm not ashamed to admit that a few tears fell, and a string of curses escaped my lips as I thought about the 30 years spent with a woman I loved more than myself, the mother of my daughter and the grandmother of our beautiful grandson. I wondered if my life would ever be happy again. On Wednesday, I called my business partner, explained the situation, and told him I wouldn't be around for a few days. He was understanding and offered the usual condolences, but deep down, he was probably thinking about how it would affect our deal. I can't blame him if that's what was on his mind. We were so close to building a small fortune together, and here I am dumping it all on him. Next, I called our lawyer for a recommendation on a divorce attorney, making sure he knew it had to be a very good lawyer, maybe the best. I wouldn't want to split millions with a cheater who might end up with a jerk spending my money on cars and whatnot. The lawyer I was referred to understood the urgency of the situation and agreed to meet with me that same evening in his office. He was upfront about it. I could count on paying him a substantial fee for the meeting outside business hours to clear his schedule and expedite document processing, but he assured me it would be worth my money. I contacted Jane around midday and checked into a nearby motel in case she was chatting to the neighbor. Naturally, she didn't respond. It made no difference to me whether she was jumping on Ross's bones or fleeing away at that point. All I wanted was to avoid talking to anyone. I told her in my message that I would contact her in the evening, but would be busy with meetings. The lawyer took charge of everything when we met that evening. He had obviously handled similar circumstances in the past. He listened to my lamentations and my wish to proceed without jeopardizing my scalp. He handed me a checklist with instructions on how to split up bills, cancel accounts, mark stuff, let Jane know, and so on. He also promised that the documentation would be ready by Friday morning. He shook his head when he learned that I was going to serve Jane the divorce papers. I told him I could pull it off without getting arrested. He acknowledged that he could understand my motivation, but he still didn't recommend it. Just don't be stupid. On Thursday, I went through the checklist. One credit card remained open, Jane's, but the credit line had been reduced from $25,000 to $8,000. We were paying off the balance each month, so there wasn't much risk of alerting Jane before the payment day arrived. On Friday at 10 a.m., I sat in the lawyer's reception area. He nearly smiled as he walked in the door. He went straight to his desk and handed me an envelope with my name on it. I signed where I needed to, and as I was leaving, he reminded me, "Remember, I said don't be a fool." I dropped by a SeaTac automobile rental agency on my way south to Olympia, and I departed in a white service van. I'm seated on the far side of the school, a block from Alan Ross's house now. I didn't want to come across as a monster who was just waiting for the perfect opportunity to end my marriage. Jane appears around 10:45, coming around the corner wearing sports attire. She goes over to Ross's place, goes up the steps, puts her hand under the planter, and walks in like it's her own. Alan Ross arrives in his Mercedes at 10:47 and parks in the garage. I pull up in the van to Sarah's house. Sarah is surprised to see me, but not as much as when I tell her why I'm here. I tried to explain it in a way that wouldn't shock her, but that's probably why I asked her to call her husband, Jim, and meet us at home as soon as he could leave. I knew that when it all ended, Sarah would need Jim's strength. "No, Dad. No, this just can't be true. Mom loves you. She would never cheat on you, and I can't be that naive. If she were cheating, I would know. You must have misunderstood everything. Sarah, I would do anything to make this lie. I've known your mother for more than 30 years. We were going to celebrate our 30th anniversary in the following year. Damn it. I'll tell you what I observed, though. I gave Sarah all the information I had at the time. Sarah was still not buying it. We got little Billard out of his crib, parked in front of Alan Ross's house, and drove Sarah's car around the corner with little Bill in his car seat. Sarah remained in the car while I approached the front door holding a big paper package. Before that robe-wearing guy opened the door, I had to knock and make a call. "Who the hell are you?" said the unpleasant guy. "I'm Jane's husband. Would you please call her to come to the door? I want to talk to her." His mouth agape, he stood there. I was prepared for his attempt to smash the door and position my foot inside the frame. I left the door open despite the excruciating pain. I swung my shoulder open and yelled, "Jane, come here right now," inside. Ross continued to press on the door, but my torso was now in the way, so it didn't help him. I yelled at Jane to come to the door repeatedly. I don't know how, but I didn't threaten Jane or Ross. I just kept my cool. I simply yelled at her to come to the door. When Jane finally appeared, she was in her workout clothes again. I suppose she was naked when Ross opened the door. She had the frightened look in her eyes that I loved. "Bill, what's going on? Why are you here?" "This isn't the real question, Jane. The real question is, why are you here?" I took the opportunity to grab Ross by the robe's collar and open it wide. Underneath, he was, of course, naked. At that moment, Jane was looking past me. The three of us were still standing at the doorway. I turned around and saw what Jane was staring at. Sarah had gotten out of her car and was witnessing the whole episode. "Is this where you brought our daughter? Really?" "No, she was determined to attend. She was going to disprove my concerns that you were having an affair. You can be upset with me, but you are the one who brought this disaster about." I was frustrated and realized I had to take a break. Jane flinched away from me like though I had given her a live bomb. "I'm going to spend tonight with Jim and Sarah in my fantasies. You can choose to read the paperwork, get legal counsel, and remain with your new partner until you are comfortable with the conditions. Jim should bring your stuff from their house, I'll ask him. You and I are divorcing. I have no idea what Sarah and Jim will decide next. Jane, goodbye." I turned and walked away. I thought I heard Jane cry out, but Ross slammed the door too loudly to be sure. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Please take us home." Sarah practically collapsed into my arms as I opened the passenger door for her. Though my life spiraled from that moment on, and in the months that followed, nothing compared to Jane's suffering. Jim was shocked upon learning about Jane and Alan Ross. He barred Jane from their home for months, refusing her access to their grandchild. Sarah didn't argue. If Jim was angry, Sarah was furious. During Jane's call to Sarah, she didn't hold back, berating her mother and vowing never to forgive her for breaking my heart. Ross eventually lost his job after losing Taylor's account and receiving a call from Jeff Taylor to Ross's manager. He threw Jane out of his home, blaming her for his demise. When Jane moved in with her parents, Sarah subsequently told me that although they were unhappy, they could sympathize with Jane's situation while the divorce was being finalized. The divorce was settled in 6 months, and my legal team protected my part in an offshore trust by making sure Jane received nothing from the sale of the patent. She did receive a good portion of our savings and house, but not nearly millions. Jane wrote me a letter soon after we got divorced, but it didn't excuse her betrayal. It gave the standard justifications, such as her longing for connection with Ross and her loneliness as an empty nest. Jane struggled to adjust. Her behavior grew erratic, leaning on alcohol. She eventually went to rehab, insisted upon by her parents. While some might relish seeing their cheating ex get what they deserve, I couldn't stop caring for Jane, despite everything. I'm grateful for my children's support. Jim's actions brought me some amusement. After Ross's firing, Jim confronted him while entertaining a woman in his backyard, questioning her about her affair with a married man. The final straw for Ross came when I assisted the kids in moving, prompting Jim to record Ross's violent outburst towards me. The police incident ensued, resulting in no charges against me. Divorce offers no guarantees. It's often a losing scenario. It's been 3 years since that dreadful day. I wish I could say life took a turn for the better, but it hasn't. I'm financially secure traveling through Italy, but every espresso in Florence brings back memories of Jane and our lost dreams. Jane is living with her parents after leaving rehab. Perhaps as a kind of punishment, Sarah permits her limited visits with the grandchildren since she still hasn't forgiven her mother. The thought haunts me. How on earth could she have done this to us? Not every movie has a tidy conclusion, but life is more like an absurdist novel by Joseph Conrad, where good doesn't always win out. I put on my helmet, finish my espresso, and venture into my own black soul.